Friends, this is an iconic neurotoxic and hallucinogenic mushroom that grows very commonly and abundantly in my area. And especially if you're a new mushroom hunter, it's one you would want to get to know so that you could avoid it for the table.
Hey there, my name's Steve and I'm a massive mushroom nerd and outdoor educator. Mushroom nerds unite.
Aha, that's me. That's where we're going. Call Guy 101, meet inside.
And I've taught safe and reliable foraging skills in wild mushroom identification and the ecology of wild mushrooms to thousands of students over the years. And now that I have this new YouTube channel, I'm making a little companion video series to complement some of the courses I teach.
Yikes.
And I'm also an outdoors writer. I've written articles about wild foods and wild mushrooms and foraging for many publications.
Foraged wild foods are among the healthiest foods you can eat. End of story.
So make sure to subscribe if you want to learn a whole lot more about wild mushrooms and foraging and the living world around you.
What I've tried to do is condense that all down into a thing that I wish I had when I started. So without further ado, let's get into it.
And the mushroom that we're going to be taking a closer look at today is the American Yellow Fly Agaric, or Amanita muscaria variation guessowii. Let me show you.
This little dude growing right on my front lawn is Amanita muscaria variation guessowii. It's our Eastern North American variant of the famous Super Mario mushroom, or the Alice in Wonderland mushroom. Amanita muscaria, maybe the most famous mushroom in the world. Its main differences from the Super Mario mushroom are that it's yellow and not red, and its stipe isn't perfectly white, although it can be sometimes. It usually has a tinge of yellow. Now, this little dude could have easily fooled me into thinking that it's a number of other very similar looking mushrooms that grow commonly here in our eastern forests, but I'm going to go over some of its key identifying features and tell you why I am certain that this is in fact Amanita muscaria variation guessowii and not, for example, say Amanita flavoconia or other similar looking mushrooms in this genus with similar looking features. So let's start off with the cap. First of all, Amanita muscaria variation guessowii can grow to pie plate size. This is a very small one. We haven't had a lot of rain. It's actually been a historic drought in my area this summer. And this guy just got a little bit of rain and decided to pop. Normally at this stage of its life cycle, I would be seeing this mushroom quite a lot physically bigger. But let's put that aside because mushrooms can be tricky in that way. Their morphology is highly dependent on the conditions they have for growing. So let's observe the cap closely. First thing I notice is the color. It starts off as this sort of dark tawny orange color, and it becomes more yellow as it moves out. There's a little bit of a starburst on the top of this mushroom. Now, color is highly variable with wild mushrooms. In fact, it's the least reliable key identifying feature. Never make an identification based on color alone. We want to combine all these key identifying features that we're going to discuss right now. So I've seen this particular mushroom almost completely orange, completely yellow, and every variation in between, but this darker center heading out into a lighter color is very typical. I see that often with this species of mushroom. Next, look at all these tiny little warts or scales on its cap. These are remnants of what's called a universal veil that I'm going to be able to show you down below in the soil with this mushroom. This mushroom starts off in its infancy in a little egg-like form, okay? It's a little tiny sac-like cup that envelops that nascent mushroom, and then this mushroom grows up and busts out of that thing. And those little scales or warts on the top are remnants of that universal veil, that little fleshy egg that it started out with. And you can see if I rub them a little tiny bit, they will often, but not always, come off. They're not coming off too good, but you get the idea. That's what those little scales are on top. Now, on the edge or the margin of this cap, I see some very useful key identifying features on this mushroom. First of all, let's start with this. You see that little flap of yellowish, whitish flesh hanging off the edge? Well, those are the remnants, and there's a few of them here. There's one there, there's one there, there's one on the other side that you can't see. Those are remnants of what's referred to as a partial veil or velum. This mushroom, and I'm going to show you this in a second, has what's referred to as a ring or annulus on its stem or stipe, and these are the remnants of that ring that are hanging onto the margin of the cap. Now, also, I hope you can see this. I'll zoom in 1 second to show you. There's some very pronounced lines or striation all the way around the cap of this mushroom. I can see the gills underneath, right up through the cap, and this is also very typical of this species. You see what I'm talking about there? We can see those gills right up through the margin of that cap. All right, just grab my trusty mushroom knife, and now I'm going to do a little excavation here because there's some features under the soil that I want to show you, and that's one of the first things you should note about any wild mushroom that you encounter is what is the substrate? Where is it growing? This guy is growing from soil and not from wood. So I'm just going to peel that back as carefully as I can, and bear with me here for a second because there is that vulva that I want to show you that's underneath the soil. I'm just going to dig under a little and push that up and see if I can pull it out intact. And there we go. Yeah, man, there's that little basil bulb. Okay. And the remnants of that universal veil or vulva, but that's not what we're looking at right now. What I want to show you is the underside of this mushroom next. We'll get back to this. All right, let's have a good close-up look at the underside, the fertile surface or the hymenium of this mushroom. This is a gilled mushroom, and the first thing I notice about this mushroom as an experienced mushroom hunter is that those gills are very close together. They're crowded. We refer to those as crowded gills. The second thing I notice is the way that they interact with this stem or stipe. This is referred to as the gill arrangement. Check it out.
So in the moment, I stated this key identifying feature really matter-of-factly, but I have to remember that this is a beginner series, and I want to make sure you really understand what I'm talking about when I refer to the gill arrangement. Now, in mushroom hunting, the way that the gills, pores, or teeth of a mushroom interact with the stipe or stem of a mushroom is what we refer to as the gill arrangement. And that interaction between the gills, pores, or teeth is a very important key identifying feature with pretty much any mushroom you're going to encounter. Now, on the mushroom we're talking about, there's some variance here. I've seen this mushroom with what we refer to as an adnext gill arrangement, which is narrowly attached to the stipe. It makes it there, it touches, but it's a very small point of contact. And I've seen this mushroom also have a free gill arrangement, where those gills don't quite ever make it to the stipe, and there's almost like a little moat around the stipe or stem of the mushroom, and the gills never touch. And this is one of the reasons I think Amanita muscaria variation guessowii can be a little difficult for new mushroom hunters to positively identify, because there is that variance. So you can see all the other features we've talked about in conjunction with that adnext or narrowly attached arrangement, or those gills could be free and never quite make it to the stipe. And to be clear, the specimen that we're looking at today has that adnext or narrowly attached arrangement.
And the last thing I notice is this creamy white color. It can be pure white all the way to cream and anything in between. And that variation is unimportant. They have to be white or in that cream zone. Now let's have a look at the stem or the stipe of this mushroom, where there's a whole bunch of really useful information as well. First of all, it can be anywhere in color, ranging from this creamy white color to pure white to yellow or anywhere in between. It has a high degree of variance in color. Next, let me zoom in a little bit and show you the remnants of that partial veil or velum, what we refer to as a ring or annulus. Do you see this little fleshy ring all the way around the stipe? And now it doesn't necessarily always go all the way around the stipe, but there'll always be some like this little sort of clue that there was a little piece of flesh there at some point. That's typically at least halfway up, and usually more like 2/3 of the way up the stem or stipe of the mushroom. And again, a really important key identifying feature of this mushroom, that ring or annulus is also sort of yellowish, whitish. Now there's a few more key identifying features that I'm going to zoom in and draw your attention to. And the first one is texture. Look at the texture of this stipe. You see these scaly sort of torn looking bands all the way along. They start up at the top third of the mushroom and all the way down at the bottom. You see these little bands, etc. This is also very typical of this species, and we use all our senses when we're mushroom hunting. I can feel those. I'm not just using my eyes to observe the stipe or any part of this mushroom. I'm actually using my fingers to feel those scaly, torn-like bands, and that texture is also a very important key identifying feature. Now let's move up the stipe. I want to draw your attention to the apex of the stem. Do you see how it's sort of long and slender and pretty uniform all the way up until the top, and then it sort of flares out a little bit. It gets sort of semi-bulbous. Well, usually the circumference of that flare or bulbous morphology at the top of the stipe is usually roughly equal to the size of that subterranean bulb at the bottom of the stipe. And now let's look all the way down at the very bottom of the stipe at the remnants of that universal veil or vulva, which is not always super obvious on this species. And this is a thing that a lot of new mushroom hunters get wrong when they're trying to identify this mushroom. This doesn't look like a typical sort of open sac-like cup like you see on a lot of other mushrooms who have this key identifying feature. On this mushroom, it can be a little hard to spot. We're lucky on this one that we've got this little piece sticking up here. There's a little bit of it there, but you can see if I'm very careful with my knife, and I hope that's in frame for you, that I can peel back the remnants of that vulva pretty much almost all the way around this mushroom. And this mushroom does start out in that egg-like, sac-like cup and eventually grows up and busts out of it. And you're always going to see some form of remnant of that vulva or universal veil at the bottom of the stipe. And the very last thing I want to draw your attention to is the color of the spores, which is one of the most reliable key identifying features in mushroom hunting. Now, I'm going to be making an entire video on the process of making a spore print, which is very, very simple, but I haven't made it yet, so stay tuned. That's coming down the pipe. Subscribe if you haven't already. There's tons more wild mushroom identification videos coming down the pipe, but the last thing I want to mention is that the spore color of this species, Amanita muscaria variation guessowii, is always, every single time, invariably going to be white. So if you do make a spore print, and I'm going to teach you how to do that soon, make sure that spore print is white, because if it's not white, it is not Amanita muscaria variation guessowii. It can only be white. Now guys, this is a poison mushroom. It contains neurotoxic compounds, ibotenic acid and muscimol, among a bunch of others that would make you very, very sick if you ate it. So I do not recommend it. Now, there are special preparations that can render this mushroom edible or useful as medicine, but I'm not going into those today whatsoever for this little ID video. What I recommend to you, especially if you're just starting out in mushroom hunting, is to leave it where you found it, appreciate its beauty, or pick it, have a look, identify it, maybe even bring it home to study it, but don't bring it anywhere near your kitchen. Guys, thanks for watching this wild mushroom identification video all the way to the end. There's a ton more of them coming down the pipe, so subscribe if you haven't already and stay tuned. But before I let you go, I want to let you know about some really important foraging safety information. Firstly, there are no maybes in mushroom hunting, and there's no magic bullets. You need to be 100% sure of the identity of every single mushroom that goes into your basket before you ever even think of consuming it. If you need a guidebook, if you need an app on your phone, which I really do not recommend for mushroom identification, or if you need a video like this one to help you identify a mushroom, you're probably not ready to consume it. Take your time, build a list of safe edible mushrooms over time. Get out in the field, learn them long before you ever start consuming them. It's the #1 rule in mushroom hunting. If you're not sure about a mushroom, it's so easy to just leave it in the bush. And secondly, if you have built up your experience and you do intend to eat wild mushrooms, make sure you're only ever collecting from safe, non-contaminated areas. Avoid busy roadsides, avoid landfills and other areas that may be polluted. Avoid golf courses and public parks where they might be spraying harmful toxins. And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, you probably want to avoid a lot of agricultural areas where they spray that junk too. And lastly, remember that we cook all wild mushrooms thoroughly for some very good reasons that I'll explain in much more detail in a future video. But for now, here's what you need to know. There's a very short list of wild edible mushrooms that can be eaten raw. You just forget about it. Cook all wild mushrooms thoroughly that are classified as safe edible mushrooms, and you're really not likely to have a problem. Thanks again for hanging out all the way to the end of the video. Until the next one, happy hunting, get out there, stay safe, and keep learning. Cheers.